My first case is to investigate the results of the two latest test subjects for the Lucid Serum experiment. These are Project Deadman and Project Sandman. The experiment aims to synthesize the maximum control of a human brain, making one more powerful in nature than the average human being. But in order to achieve this, the industry needs to find out the maximum limit a human brain can handle, and bring those same procedures to future test subjects. Project Deadman puts a 69-year-old Robert Rodrigo to a theoretical stasis of death by shutting down all of his five senses, his sense of sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing, ultimately putting a conscious man into a state of synthesized death. And the results were extraordinary, but it did come with a price. The ever-increasing question that baffles the scientists for a very long time. Day 1. According to their logs, the surgery was successful. The patient can no longer see, feel, hear, taste, or smell. But naturally, he panicked, because the moment he woke up, he can't even feel if he was moving. He doesn't even know whether he's standing or not, or if anyone was around him. It took some time to calm him down, but then they were able to lock him up in the room, and that's where they began observing him. Day 2, the patient kept on walking around the room, not noticing that he's been hitting walls left and right. So they decided to tie him down in the bed. But feeding him was initially the most challenging part. Without his sense of taste or touch, he doesn't even know if he was being fed or not. But luckily, they were able to find a way for that. But on day 3, this is when things got interesting. The patient began murmuring words as if like he is talking to someone, very quietly. One of the scientists even went in to make out what he was trying to say, but the language was foreign. No, it was more like alien even. It was no language anyone has ever heard of, but as they began recording the patient to know what he was saying, he began to twitch his head side by side and began to spaz out like an epilepsy attack. The scientists called out for the emergency security, but once they came, the patient screeched out a deafening scream that got people walking away from him. Eventually, though, he was detained and began to whisper to himself when he was alone. The situation remained until day 6. The patient just whispers to himself, and whenever someone gets near him, he lets out a banshee-like scream, preventing people from getting close to him. Dextrose was the only thing that's hydrating him and keeping him alive, and the doctors had to wear earplugs whenever they change it every day. But even with ear protection, they still had a hard time staying in there for long. 7 days in his artificial death, the patient became increasingly more and more aggressive. It came to a point that they had to strap him down even more to prevent him from harming himself and others. For days on, he screeched in agony at the top of his lungs like he was in gruesome pain. Screams you never thought a person could produce. Until day 9. He became silent. And for another week, he stayed like this, but his brain activity was spiking as if like he was having a nightmare, a 1 week continuous nightmare. And after this, he leaned his head facing towards the camera, as if like he regained his sight. And just before his heart stopped instantly, he said the words,
"He was here. We are meaningless."
Project Sandman, on the other hand, takes on a different approach. Tyler King was used to test the maximum awareness level of an ordinary person by keeping him awake for as long as possible. At first, they thought of dosing him with toxins that could help him stay awake, but they were also worried that these chemicals might damage his brain neurologically, so they ended up on using fear instead. Whenever Tyler tries to sleep, they electrocute him, stimulating fear into his head so that he would feel scared whenever he tries to get some sleep. And of course, this would up to its own set of problems. His increased anxiety, fear, and lack of sleep resulted in an act of desperation. But no one knew what he was desperate about, because they eventually found out that sleep was no longer an option for him. Like Project Deadman, after days of this experiment, he began screaming in agony, eventually begging for his death. And then he was found standing still in the corner of his room for about an entire day. When the people tried to get to him, they discovered that he's been dead for hours. No wounds, no signs of intoxications, and there's nothing that the camera caught to pinpoint his death. The autopsy even concluded that his heart just stopped with no apparent reason. But when I visited the room he was contained in, I've noticed a small piece of chipped wood on the floor from his bedside table. So, I flipped the table over, and there, written with scratches from what I can assume was his fingernails, the words, "He was here." Now, in conclusion of these events is that the scientists were able to achieve the results they were looking for. But one question remains. Who is him? Both test subjects never knew each other nor interacted in any way possible. They are of different ages, culture, and beliefs, yet they both broke down into a state of insanity. Then their bodies froze and just stopped working, and then they both mentioned him before they both died. My initial theory is that these test subjects may have experienced telepathy. Based on the brain scan from Project Deadman, the spikes were indeed very high, and it may have caused them to come in contact with someone or something. In order for me to find out, I must investigate further on. The industry does have their higher goals besides maximizing human capabilities. So this has been Leonard Constantine, logging out.